Once again, good evening, everyone. It's been an amazing, um, come a long way. We're almost coming to the peak of our classes. So I believe you have sort of gone through the article I dropped in the morning to install your Node.js and every other necessary things you're able to install. So the article contains installing your Node.js and running your React, creating a React app, and it has a detailed explanation on everything you need to know when creating a React app and each or steps on how to do that, which I believe everyone here has done that already. So those and I said congratulations to you all. We have created our first React app. So if you are happy to be in the class and you are following, please so that we could flow and start off with tonight's class. I can see thumbs up. I can see emojis. You are not happy to be in the class today. Today is midweek. I know if you're happy to be react with your favorite emoji. I can't believe your favorite emoji is a thumbs up. No, that's favorite emoji. Right. Um, very much excited. Very much excited. We are and we are flowing. So we setting up my screen to kick off. Like I said, I believe that every one of us has have created their have created a React app. So you will look into the structure with, like I said, with the article, you must have created your React app, and if you have done that, you will structure a folder structure that contains a lot of files, a lot of files, and you are these files and how does this work and how do I make use of it and all that. So I'll go for that to explain how we would make use of it and all that. So let's jump right in. I believe I see my screen. So here we have our React app. So the first folder you get there, you have on your once you create your React project, you have a folder called node modules. You have your public folder, you have a source folder, you have .git ignore, you have package.lock.json, you have package.json, you have readme.md. So now let's figure out what each of these files and folders on our React application mean and does. So the first one is the node module. If you open the folder contains all our dependencies, and this folder is ignored when we set up source control. So if we get there, look during our when we learned about GitHub, we use git ignore to this because this package is always heavy and bulky. We have to we always ignore it. So when we get to git ignore, I'll explain further about this. But this folder contains all our dependencies. And it is important to know that the package.json file works in package.json is a file, it works in hands with this. So what happens is that whenever you run this npm install or yarn install, all the here is what is contained in this folder. So this is where it runs and is you have all the dependencies stored there here. So your JSON contains information. So once you delete your node module, you no longer have your dependencies. So your application will break once you delete your node modules folder, your application will break because you no longer have your dependencies. So to reinstall these dependencies, you can use yarn install. So once you run your yarn install, what happens is that it will look through the package.json, like I explained earlier, the package.json file for the list of dependencies and then install it. So that's what the command does. It goes to the package.json, then goes to the package.json file. So once I delete it, to install it, to retrieve this, if you want to reinstall, this is contains all your dependencies here. So if I delete this, my application will break. So if I delete it and I want to reinstall it, I have to run a script. I have to run something like yarn. I have to do npm install. Also, once I run npm install, it will reach through the package.json file and install all these dependencies listed here. So So sorry for the breakup. Sorry for that. So I believe we are following. So we have at the node node module folder. So next is our public folder. We have our public folder. So inside our public folder, so although the majority of work will be done in the source folder, the public folder contains some static files such as your index.html. Then it contains static folders like favicon, icon, logo, pictures, images, manifest.json, and robot.txt. So now this is where you have your index.html. So here, this is where you can change the title just like you have on your normal HTML. This is the index.html, and now let's look through this file and what it really entails. So now you have just like your normal HTML, this is your head section and this is your body section. So here we have meta, the normal way we have it, description, website scripted, we could change it to whatever you want. That's the content of your site. So this is where you define it. You change. You could change the title. So let's call this. I'm going to call this my TEFEM app. TEFEM React app. So now this is so you have in your body section um you have your no script. You need JavaScript to run this app. So this is no script. This is a setup. Then you have a div inside the body that has the ID of root. Now I want you to take note of this. This is a div that has an ID of root, and you just have div. So this is the only thing you have in your. So this HTML file, this HTML file is a template. If you open it directly on your browser, you will see an empty page. You can add web front, meta and analytics to this file. The build step will place the bundle script into the body tag. To begin the development, run npm start or yarn start. To create the production build, you run npm run build or yarn build. Now, this is what happens is the reason why I'm emphasizing on this file now. This is only what you have in this HTML is this, but this ID root is what is connecting every other thing. The whole app is connected here. So once I run a build, compile a build, so this is the only file I have. Here, this is where you add your meta, you can add your metadata, every other web forms, whatever you like to connect from here. Then you have your RPA. Like I did mention during the time we are learning our JavaScript, and yes, during JavaScript, I did mention when the time I opened the file, that was vanilla JS. When I opened the file, it was just a one folder and nothing was inside, but there was ID, a lot of IDs. So I told the story on how I was confused and I was like, okay, what's this? How come that there's no HTML, there's no write-up, but that's a full page. So till I got to understand that everything was coming from the JavaScript. So this is how this file structure looks like. So basically, your public folder files, contains your static files. So this HTML index is your normal HTML file. So the only code to remember is your div, the div, this section, this line 31, where you have div with ID of fruits. That's the only thing which where the entire React application is placed. So the entire application is placed within this div here. So that's where you have it. So the next file we look at before we come to the source, let's go through git ignore. So from the name git ignore means these are the files, all the files listed here are the files that GitHub will ignore. So any file you add here, GitHub will ignore it. Just like the name, git ignore it means that you are specifying that this file, which file or folder will be ignored once you use your GitHub. So like I said, Git is already initiated in this. Once you use Create React app, your Git is already initiated by default. You have this project is already has a Git in it. So you just commit and push to your own repo and all that. So that's basically that. So here we have that this is where we ignore our nodes modules and every other file. Then we ignore our build, we ignore .env and all these files. These files here, any file that you put here, any file that you put here or folder, it means that whenever I run a git commit or uh, git commit or git, it doesn't affect that. So I believe you are following. So whenever I run a git, every file here, once I run my git commit, git adds, and all my git actions, it doesn't affect any of them because it, git ignored. So git is ignored. Git ignores this file. Every of these files not being committed. Once I stage my changes and commit them and push it, these files here, every file or folder listed here is being ignored. So that's basically the work of this git ignore. So you can decide to add every other thing you want. So another one that we need to look at, though we don't have it right now, is the build folder. So once you run yarn build or npm run build, that's for production, is another folder that you can't see right now because it's only when you build your project that's when you see that. So when I mean build your project, it's when you compile your project for production, you run your yarn or npm run build. Once you do that, it generates a build file. When we get there, you will see that. So now let's go to the main file that we need to cause folder, which is the source folder. So this source folder, so before that, so far so we have covered some fundamental folders, but our main concern is the source folder from the name source. So the source folder is where the development takes place. This is where the whole development takes place. So here you under the source folder you have your app.css, app.js, app.test, index.css, index.js. You have a logo. You also have other setup.text and all that. So this is basically where you have your. So now let's take it one after the other. Your app.js. So your app.js, this is where all your components eventually meet. So all your components, this is where it meets all the components you will have in this project. This is where they meet. Which the name of the is important, but it's a good practice to keep the name so that like this so that other developers will understand your code. So the name you could change the name to any other thing. You could use main or JS or anything, but it's advised to use your it's advised to use app.js app so that every other person will also understand that I believe you are following. So we now have our the next folder we'll look at is index.js. Index.js. So index.js here, this is the starting point. This is the starting point of your application. More specifically, this is where you target your root ID. You remember in your HTML file, we have a div. So reading line 7 here says cos root equals react dom.create bracket document dot get element by id root. Now during our JavaScript class, we know what this thing means. Means we are targeting the element that has the ID of root. So which is in our index.html file. So we have a div with an element with an ID of root. So this is the starting point of our website. This is the starting point of our app. So it's from here and renders it on the app.js. So looking at this structure, so once it gets the element.id, it renders it on app.js. So I'm calling this app from this component is your app.js. So that's the component here. So we are calling from app.js. So now we have, if you look closely, we have app.css and index.css. So this is your index.app.css. Then this is your index.css. Index.css. So the both are content styles for your application. So if I run this app, so once I run this app, I have this. This is basically here. So if I comment on this, so basically we have everything shattered. So these two folders, the index.css contains global styling. So if you see the difference between the index and the app here contains global styling, like your this is just like you writing a CSS reset. This is where you put your global styling, the font family, then you have your this is on the body, this is a global, when we mean by global styling. So this is where you do your reset setup that is global, that affects everywhere, every app. So for the app.css, this is just a CSS that affects all the what you have on your app.js. So that's what happens in the CSS. So see, the CSS here affects the JS. So now, during our yesterday introductory class, during our Q&A section, yesterday we answered some question about JSX. I asked about what is JSX. Some persons gave answers and their own opinions to what they understand by JSX. So JSX is a JavaScript extension syntax used in React to easily write HTML and JavaScript together. So writing code in React takes a long time, but because you have to use React.create element function every time, and so if you want to write React, you have a different way of doing that. But the reason for JSX is a syntax makes it easy for you to write to use your React to write HTML and JavaScript inside together without any basic um, configuration. So this is because this is a JSX. So now you ask, what are actually the do's and don'ts for this JSX? Because we have treated this yesterday on JSX during our discussion time. So this is to make sure you are aware of some things that are important, that you not pick some bugs on the way. So your markup should usually place after your. So now this is all you need to know. One is that your markup, which is your HTML, should is usually placed after the return statement. So this is your return statement. After your return statement, this is where you put it. So you don't copy, you don't put this here. Obviously, once you have picture installed, it will, you have an error everywhere. It's red, it has an error, and there is already a setup for Webpack. While once you run create React app, it comes with some setup which helps to debug your gives you a debugging. Once you have an error, it identifies with ESLint. So we'll get to how to also touch how to use this set up this ESLint. But once you use create React app to create React application, you have this set up by default. So it helps you once you have to debug your codes without running into much errors. So you can't do this. If you do this, you run into error. So your markup is one thing you need to take note is that your markup is usually placed after the return statement, either as a single line of code or a block line of code. So always note that in React you put your markup after the React statement. You don't put it before. So take note. Then secondly, all your code should be wrapped in a single tag. So you notice that all my code is tagged in a single tag. You can't have two here. You can't have two tags. You can't have two tags. So everything should be wrapped inside one inside one tag. So which you could use div, or you could use a no content. What do I mean by no content? Something like this. So you could use this tag without any elements, no element name. So it's called a no content, a tag with no content. So with that, it goes a long way to help you won't run into errors. So how do we add comments in JSX? That's our React. How do we add comments? So this is how to add your comments. You have your query bracket. So in VS Code, using VS Code, you use your command, your control backward slash. Once you do that, that's for comment. That's a shortcut for comment. Control for those using Windows is control plus, so control forward slash. So control forward slash will give you, will bring out your comment. For those using Mac OS, is command slash. So command slash gives you what you want. It gives you this, or you could type it manually. So you call it bracket, you push this, you put this, and this, and this. So so this is just like what you have in your CSS. So if you look closely, this is just like what you have in your CSS. In your CSS, you use this pattern. Now in JS, you use just like you use in your CSS, and your CSS pattern writing comments plus curly bracket. So you could always remember, or just use the shortcut and do that. It's very much important to use your shortcut, right? Comments. So with this, we have gone through the basic structures and basic files. We have looked at basic file structures and every other thing that we need to know, and the do's and don'ts JS, on JSX, and every other thing there. I believe we have done justice to that. We don't have any question. So if you are following, please give me a thumbs up. If you have a question, you could ask your question before we continue. All right. One person, go ahead with your question.
My question is, how do I get to this point on my VS Code after installing Node.js and using the command prompt and um, opening up this local host and everything? How do I now open it up in my VS Code, like this place you are right now? How do I get there?
The same way you have been adding folder to your workspace, there's nothing changes. You understand? No matter the programming language and everything, VS Code is VS Code. So you go to your file and import, add folder to workspace. You click on it, you select the folder you want to add to workspace. Once you select it, you click add, it adds to workspace. That's basically how to do that. Nothing changed. Nothing changes. You understand? It's only the file. What is the content of the file that changes, not the way the operation of PS code. PS code is still PS code, no matter the language, no matter what you are doing there. You understand?
So are you saying that I should create a new folder and then open it up in VS Code like normal?
No. Right now, if you followed through the article and you create React app, so once you run your create React app on your terminal, it creates a folder, and it creates a folder with all these informations you need. If you follow through
Okay,
the
so I should run
article,
this create app on my VS Code.
yes, no, anywhere on your terminal, you can
Okay.
use your command,
Okay.
your command line to do that. Your CMD.
o-
Follow through the article I
Okay.
sent. I believe you should have done that before this class. You follow through the article that I sent in the morning. It has how to set up from the beginning to the end and samples on how to do that. So thank you so much. Florence,
Okay. And so I just want to understand something. While I was going through the
sorry.
documentation, that React documentation, I saw that
Okay.
it's your components also cannot return multiple JX tags. You have to wrap them into a shared parent like a div or an MC wrapper. That was what you explained last, right?
Yes.
Okay. That means
So
if you have multiple tags, we have to wrap them up in a div for them to work properly, else we will have an error.
yes. So now let me re-explain what I just explained to follow suit.
Oh,
So
okay.
this is your parent folder now. That's that's what you just said. This is the explanation. You have to have you cannot have two two files children inside a return statement. You understand? You cannot have that. You have to wrap it inside a parent folder, which now our parent folder is this div. You understand? This div with class name of. So this is our parent folder. So either we use a div as our parent folder, or we use a no content tag. So this is your no content tag. You could use that. So here you can now create your div, add anything. You can have multiple divs, multiple sections and everything. But this is your component. Each component con is only has a one parent element tag that is used to wrap all every other thing. This is your parent tag, which is your no context list. So under it here, inside here, you can now add the number of what you want to add. So either you use a no content tag, or you use your div, or you use section. You can use section, you can use div. Well, what the thing is that everything must be wrapped inside a parent tag. Do you understand?
Yes, sir.
Reason
Thank you.
being, the reason being that React, we when we talked about element, we talked about adjacent adjacent pathways where we follow through from the parents, it reads from the parents to the child, to the children, you get. So that's how React treats the parents to the children. So this is the parent tag. So every other thing there is the child, the children tags. So you have to, that's how the adjacent, oh God. Okay, let me use a more. So that's how it works. It works like one carton, you say one carton of noodles. Why? Inside the one carton of noodles are different sachets of noodles. Do you understand that? So, which you can't just pack sachets of noodles and sell. It doesn't work that way. You understand? It has to be inside the carton. You understand it? That's the that's the best way to explain that. So I believe we all have understood that. So we are progressing. Like I did mention yesterday, we will look at the components, JSX states, and prompts. So before now, we have looked at JavaScript. We know how variables work, how functions, objects and arrays. We know how to do that. Object and array destruction. We know how to do callbacks and all that. We did that. So we did look into this yesterday, how to create folders. I believe everyone has done that. We have explained how folders work and how things are being done. So now in the last section, we saw in our app.js, which is our first React component we meet. So the first React component we meet is the app.function app. This is our first React component, which contains what we have here. This guy here is so the app.js is our first React component that we meet. So an application built with React or one of the popular front-end framework like Vue or Silvet, for example, is built using dozens of components. So we also did mention during our discussion yesterday when we asked what are the benefits of components. Why do we use what is the concept? I did ask what is the concept of components and what is the benefit. If let me check, I just mentioned that it was an exam question. So I did mention what it really entails. What is the concept of components? Some of us mentioned the reusability, flexibility, readability, and we had a lot of reasons why the concept behind components, using components, you understand, which we did that yesterday, and I believe with all the opinions and answers we were able to understand what component is and the benefit, the concept and the benefit of components, which one of the major is reusability. One of the major for is reusability. Now, a component, we have a sample of components here. So this is our component. So now what are contained in a component? We have a component can have its own state, which means it has some variables that other components can't access unless this component exposes the state to the rest of the application. When we look at React state, we'll get to understand that. Then a component can also receive data from other components. So this is in case you are working with props. So we will still go to the terms. We will go look in details, more terms of JSX, states, and props. So I believe I've explained JSX, what JSX is. I've done this. We talked about it in the last couple of minutes. So, another key points before we move fully into React components and React states and React props is the difference between JSX and HTML. So now, what is the key difference? What is the key difference between JSX and HTML? So JSX kind of looks like HTML, but it's not. So one of the difference might be quite obvious if you look at the app. One of the major, there's a strange attribute called class name. Now, in HTML, we use class attributes, which is actually the most widely used attributes when it comes to HTML, in your HTML, for various reasons. We use it to for CSS, naming and calling our CSS. We use it to, when we did JavaScript, we use it to create element does get documents with class this, class that, and all that. We is actually the most used attributes in HTML, which is the class attribute. So the class attribute allows us to style our HTML elements. It allows us to give our naming, class names, and all that. So now, but there's a problem when it comes to writing UI code in JavaScript files. So the class in JavaScript programming language is a reserved word. Class in JavaScript programming is a reserved word, which means we can't use this reserved word as we want. It serves a specific purpose, like defining JavaScript classes. And the React creator had to choose a different name for it. So, which is how we ended up to have class name instead of class. So now, because class in Java programming language is a reserved word, so the creator of React had to choose a different name. So instead of using class, just like the way we use it in HTML, we use class name in React. To which this is the one of the major difference. I believe you have taken note of that. So in case you really need to remember this, because when you might, okay, already have a project somewhere and I need to copy a HTML somewhere and paste in my React code. Now you always know that you have to change from class name, because if you don't do that, so you will have this warning: invalid DOM property class. Do you mean class name? If you open console.log, you always have this error because you are using a class instead of a class name. So React makes sure that things does not break. So it will always raise an alarm for you that, okay, this is this, you're having this error, please change this so and so place. So this is not the only HTML feature that suffers from this problem, but is the most common one, which I said the most common one is where we use class and class name. Most persons, most beginners forget and still use class when they are supposed to use class name, which eventually they have this warning, they are supposed to fix that. So in order to avoid all these red warnings here, you use your class name instead of class. So one of the key things you should note is that in React you use class name, not you don't use class, because class is a reserved word in JavaScript programming. So another big difference between JSS and HTML is that HTML is very relaxed. HTML is very relaxed. We can say even if you have an error in the syntax, even if you have a syntax error or you close the wrong tag or have a mismatch, the browser will try its best to interpret the HTML without breaking. So that's HTML5 for you. But which is one of the core features of web, is very forgiving. So I think this is the emotional part of web. It's very forgiving. So HTML is very forgiving. It can, is you have a mismatch, you have a syntax that is not correct. It forgives you and try to turn a blind eye and continue. But that does not work for JSX. It doesn't work that way. JSX is not forgiving. If you forget to close the tag, you will have an error message like this on your browser. You have failed to compile, closing error, expected just as closing tag. It indicates the closing tag for you to have an error. You have an error message popped out immediately on your browser without looking back. So it's not forgiving, all like HTML might it should turn a blind eye and pretend as if nothing is happening. But JSX doesn't do that, it's strict to that. So React usually gives very good and informative error message that points you to the right direction to fix the error. So another big difference between JSX and HTML is that in JSX, we can embed JavaScript. We can embed JavaScript in JSX. So how do I mean by embedding JavaScript? So now we have here, how do you embed JavaScript? So now before the return statement, you can add your JavaScript, because there's equal to me. So this is JavaScript. You can embed your JavaScript in your component. So this is one of the major, another difference between HTML and JSX. You can do that. So that is that for JXS. We have gone through the difference between a JSX file and a HTML file. So now managing state in React. So we are going to talk about React state. We have also looked at React component, how React component is. Then we are looking at managing state in React. So now every React component can have its own state. So what do we mean by state? So the state is the set of data that is managed by the component. Like our state right now is that we are learning. That's our state of being right now. So which is different from someone that is outside. So that is how it is. So a real state, a company can have its own state. So how do we manage the state? So now if we use make reference to an example of a form where each individual element in the form is responsible for managing each state. So we could on a form, so we can create a form where each input field has its own manages its own state. Just like a link is responsible for knowing if a mouse is hovering on it or not. So in React or in other component-based framework or library, all our applications are based on and make heavy use of component state. So we manage states using the use state utility provided by React. So we manage it by using use state. So it's technically a hook. You don't need to know the details of hook right now, but that is what it is. So when we get there, you understand that. So calling use state, you will get back a new state variable and a function that we can call to alter the value, each value. So now you can accept an initial value of the state item and returns an array containing the state variable and the function you can use to call to alter the state. So let's check out an example. So now we have course count and set count. So this is like we said, it has an array of we have an array of count and set count is equal to use state 0. That means the initial state of our account is 0. So now on our function, we can modify a function that once that function is, we can use a function that when a button is being clicked, it increases, it changes the value, alters the value of this from 0 to 1. It sets the count to 1, no more 0. So we have that our initial state is 0, but we now have a function using the set count that once this we can use once the button is clicked, set count as 1 plus 1 means at any time I click on plus 1, it sets the count. It updates the state to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which is what we use both in React when in e-commerce when you add to carts, you do a lot of things. You see that you have your figures and all that. So that is basically how it is. So we'll dive more deep more into this. So this is important. We can't just alter the value of a state variable directly. So we must call its modifier function. Otherwise, the React components will not update its UI to reflect the change of that data. So calling the modifier is a way that we can tell React that the component state has changed. So the syntax is a bit weird, right? Since use state returns an array, we use array destruct destroy thing to access each individual item, like cause count, cause array count, set count is equal to use 0. So I'm going to let's create this component. I'm going to create component. Let's copy this. Or let's create ours here. So here on our React page, we already have. So here, I'm going to, like I said, we embed JavaScript. So we'll just write course state is count and comma set count equal to use state and initialize it as 0. So I just created my returns a state value and the function. I just created a state. So now I can add a button here. So this is and add a button here. And use update as the name. Update count. Okay. I'll add an event listener and an event handler. I will say using. So now, while I'm creating, one thing with React is changes as once you write code, the code is keeps running and keeps compiling and compiling. I said, point now that I have a finished business there, I'm going to use now. We during our JavaScript class we looked at arrow function. So I'm going to create an arrow function. I'll use set count right to say count plus 1. So this means that at every point I click on this, it adds this count. If I run the definition is this count, which is 0. At any point, every time I click on this, on count, once I click on this one, update count, it adds 1 to the initial count value. So let's check out our code. Let's say, so once I click on this count, update count, then all right, let's add h1 so I could use something like this. So we could use this to read the value of count. So now, every time I click on this, I have my count, which is the state of this count. So once I refresh, the state goes back to 0 because that's the initial state. So until I click on this button, the state changes. And so that is how to manage React states. That's a quick example to manage React states. So we will look at what we call component props. So component props is also known as property. I believe we all are following. Please, if you're following, please drop your emojis. I would confirm we are following. All right, thank you so much. Okay. So React component props in React props, we call it props. So props is known as property, is a short form for property. So we call props the initial values passed to a component. We so now initially I'm going to create a component called React message. So I'm going to a component here. So now we have um, okay. Okay. So let's do this. Let me use this. I have this. I'm going to create another function here. I'm going to create another function. I'll call it, sorry, should be on top. Function, so function counter. So now I'm going to comment on this right now. So I'll use this is count. What is that? So because that's the one line of code. So now I will now use this counter here. I'll use. So how do we use this component? I'll call it with a capital letter, and here, so here, if I go back to my browser, like it's working, I have my text here, my counter. Okay, this is a different component. Entirely, this is a different component. I just created a new component here, and this is my app component. So now we want to look at React props property. So I'm going to add an initial value of, I'm going to add initial value. So now we have that. I'll use something like hmm, I'll use something like something that is equal to count. So now what I'm doing is I'm passing in the value of this count here to this component. So now I'm passing it to this component. I'll come to this place and say props and here I can change this to props and okay. I run this. Okay, I believe network is cut off. So we are looking at passing information from our prop. So here sorry, it should be, I initiated that this is counter. So here I have to pass counter here, counter equal to counter. So with that, I have passed this information into this component. I've passed the count, the value of this count into this component. Now going to this component here, this is my props. So I now collected the value that I'm passing them and pass it back here, which is this value I have here. So whenever I click, I still have the same thing. So basically, let me explain this so that we will understand. So now, initially we had this, we had that H1, we had that H1 was count, which was passing the number of counts that we have, which is the value that when we looked at our state management, whenever we click on this button, it increases the value of this count, which is what we are passing here to get this value. So now we decided to create a component for this counter. We don't want this counter to be in the same. We decided to create components. So we copied this out and created a component called counter and passed the components to this place, created the component and called it here. So now we have the component here. So if I use hi, you will get the component here, hi. So now we want to pass the information. We want to pass the value of this count, the value of this count, want to pass the current value of this count to this component so that it will be represented here. So we now have to create a caller. I now called something like counter. You could use any name, could call it my probs equal to the value of what I want, what I'm passing to the count. So this is the count. If I right click, go to definition, it takes me to now there. So now what I will do is that because I'm in this component, I'm saying that my props is equal to value of count. So when I get to my component, what I will do, I will use my props. So now even if you notice here, when I highlight on this, it says that counter is declared, but it's never read. I could do something like fix. So what I will do is this. I will change back to this is my props. This is the value I'm passing. I'm passing my props is equal to count. So here now I have to get the value of my props here, and I will now pass the value here as my props. I will now pass the value here. The value I'm getting now, we pass that my props is equal to count. So my props is now equal to count here, this count. So why here I now get use my props here. I'm getting back the value that was being passed here, and I pass it back to this H1. So when I do that, I have my components back. So whenever I update, it's update. So what I'm doing, I'm passing this information from this component to this component. I believe you understood that. So which is what we call. So now let me explain some few things about the props. The curly bracket have a various meaning. In the case of the function argument, curly bracket are used as part of the object destruction syntax. Destructing syntax. So now object destructing syntax. I believe you treated that during your JavaScript class. So then we use the so now curly bracket, I'm going to explain curly bracket, what is used. The curly bracket is used in the function. Now this curly bracket one here contains the code block, our code block of our function. That's one use of. Then we also use it to print our JavaScript value. We use curly bracket to print our JavaScript value, which is what I did here. To print my count, I had to use curly bracket. I use curly bracket and the value of what I was printing. So that's the work of curly brackets. We use it to print JavaScript value in JSX. We also use it to define the function block code. So now passing props to components is a great way to pass value around in application. So a component either holds data, has it, or receives data through the props. So a component either holds the data or it receives data. In our case here, our own is receiving data. So we can also do this, copy this button here and put it here, then pass it. When we now do this function that is happening here, this on click here, can happen in this component. Then we pass the information from this component to this component. So now a component can either hold data or receive data through its props. So we can also send function as props. So that a child component can call a function in a parent component. So a special props is called children that contains a value of anything that is passed between the opening and the closing tag of that component. So now we could, all right, let's try in another. Let's let me explain another. Now what we did here, we used this component, we passed information here, right? So that's what we did here. So this time around, we are going to do something else. So I'm going to create another function. This time I'll use function. Let's use function title. Title. I'll use. I want to return h1. Oh, let's return h2. So now, if I call this function here, I want to practice, let's practice passing children props. So now I'll use something like this. Children. I want to spell Christmas. So what I'm going to do is this. I'm going to create for that component here, component title. So instead of using a self-closing, I'll create this way. So whatever any value I add here, I will use something like this is my first React code. So now what this thing is doing is that it is now creating this, every value here. This content now is taking the style of an H2 element. So if I change this to H1 element, H1 element, see the value changes. So now this is how you create components. So you can decide that for title, I can now style all my title using class name. I could do something like hmm, PG. No. So now I could put any style. Let's use padding 5. So now I can give every styling to H1. So what I will do anywhere on my app I want to create a H1 element, I'll just import this component called title and put in the value. Just put in, I'll use it to wrap the content and it will take the styling of a H1. So okay, let's try it out with. I wanted us to try it out with this button, but it's going to be a bit complex because I will have to also pass this on click action to there, that which I can globally do that every button I can define the style of every button of a button. I'll just create a component called button. Then everywhere I want to use a button, I will import the button component with the style. I don't need to style it again. With anywhere I import the button, just the same way I did for this title. Okay, let's create for paragraph. Let's use para G or para G. Let's use para G and function. So let's return. So now I will create children. I believe we understand the concept of these children, the difference between these two components and this one here. I will explain it again. Then I believe then we will take some answers before we draw the curtain for tonight's class. So what I will do is this. So we have the paragraph here, right? I'm going to remove this. We already have a paragraph which says edit source, blah 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 and blah to save this. I'm going to remove this here. What I will do, I'll wrap this. I'll call my component parag G and wrap it here. Once I do that, I still have that. So if I inspect this, you still see that this is a paragraph tag. So now this is how we create components. And so now these two props have different things that we just, like I said, a component can either hold data or receive data. So in this first case, in the case of counter, we are receiving data. But in the case of G and title, we are holding data. So what we do, anywhere we wrap this thing, anywhere we wrap our title this way, it takes up this component. So you will see the difference actually. This has an opening and a closing tag. Why this is a self-closing tag. Now, and we are passing it, we have information we are passing in. So here now we actually wrapping in this to access the value. What we are doing is creating children props. So creating children props is, so now let me recap on what I've said on this so that we could draw a thin line and understand more better. So the first case is us passing information to the component for count, where we are getting the value of this count, the current state of our counter, and we pass it into our counter component, then fetch the value here, and which is what is giving us this counter here. So it's giving us this count. Now, the second thing we did was passing a special prop called children, so now that which contains the value of anything that is passed between the opening and the closing tag of that element. So now which we did where we have our title that we pass it. So everything within, once anything that we wrap within this opening and the closing tag takes the style of this title, which is a header head one. So for this paragraph, it's the same thing. So now the reason for this, we could just well, in this component I can style, give all the styling I want in this component. So anytime I need I need a paragraph to take up that style, I could just call the component and use it there. For buttons, you can do it for buttons, you can do it for links. That is how component-based programming is very much usable at every point. I don't need to style, you just style a simple paragraph or H1 or any, I just give it a name or button. So all throughout the app, I will just use one button. Just anywhere I need the button, I just import the component and use it there. Very simple. So that's the reusability in React. So now I will take some questions before we call it a night. So do have any question? Who has a question? Who has is not following, or you have a contribution? Please indicate that we could take a few questions and draw the question for tonight. Okay, all right. All right, Lucy. Sorry, Florence. Go ahead.
Okay, sir. So I want to understand something. Is it that all the code we'll be writing will be on this app.js? What about the others?
So now, yes, it won't be. I could, okay, let me create my source. What I'm going to do, the best practice, let's do the best practice components, component. So I'm going to create here, I'll create a file called counter counter.jsx. Now I'll use something like now I have a extension that gives me a React setup. So if I use this, it gives me this setup by default. Import React from React function counter and give me export default counter. So it should look like. So I can either use this or use ROC. So with this, I have export default function counter. So I don't have the separate, just like the other one. The other part is I have my function and below I have my export default counter. So now this line is what exposes this component to every other component. So now I'm going to copy this out of here, come to this counter and paste it. So what I'm going to do is this here on my app.js. So now it's already having an error. Could not find the name counter. I just right click. So I have it. I'll just click install. So once I do that, I've imported counter from counter component slash counter. So with that, I still have my back. So the same thing goes to title. I'll copy it out. It here on my component. I'll create a file called title.js. Enter. I'll use RCL and just copy this and paste here. Come back here on my title. I'll just go in and import it. So I've import title from the folder where it's coming from. Then the next one is the paragraph. So I'll pick it up from here. So I pick it up from here, click on create another title, create paragraph, so paragraph. Let's give it a full name paragraph. So I will just rehash this. So now this is a bit I have a bit challenging. I'm going to do something like this, then complete this paragraph. So in order, so I'll go back to my app and complete this paragraph. So enter. I've done that. I'll just copy this. So now I have everything set up here. I have my counter, probably a different folder entirely with different folder. And this is my application. I just imported this and everything still works the same way. I believe you understand. Florence, thank you for your question. So we have distributed our files. So that's how we structure our files in our components. Just create a component folder so that for this is for easy usability. So for me, what I always do, always have my a folder called components. I create another folder called pages. So here for this pages, this is like different page. If I'm working on a web app, the app I'll just do this is where I have my home page, I have my home page, my home page, my about us, we do contact page is all in this page. So if I have something like a dashboard or another flow, I'll just be like, okay, then what I'll do, I'll come back here and create another folder and give it a name. So now also here I could do something in my components. I could have this, I can arrange this thing differently. What I could say like this should be for topography, topography, so for topography, what I will do, I'll move one, two, because it has to do with topography, I'll move it into this. What am I doing? So here, I'll move here, move, I'll move this into the space too. So now you can arrange your files the way you want it. So now what I did on my VS Code setup is that even if I move a file, it automatically redirects it. So now if you look close, you have that dot components. This is your relative path to where this component is located. Dot components, the slash topography slash paragraph. This is where you locate this. So you could have components, you have a different set of components. You could have your preloaders, you have your models, you have your different components. If any name you have, you can arrange your file structure for easy readability. So I believe I've answered your question and I've done justice to that. Who else has a question before we call it a night? Okay, so in the absence of questions,
So are we not taking attendance today?